The Forbidden Tale, a comprehensive study on lesbian, gay, bisexuals, LGB in Iran. Chapter 4. The Research Study. Contents: Forbidden Cities, the Research Study. Background of the research. Methodology adopted in previous studies. Methodology. Population and geographical location of the research. Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan. Area of research and sampling. Research methods. Data collection and fieldwork. Ethical considerations and limitations. Methodological challenges in conducting research on LGB. An elaboration on the researcher's narrative. Findings of the research, qualitative results of the research study. Introduction. The research study has three major dimensions: a literature review, quantitative survey distributed to LGB individuals from 3 Iranian cities, and a qualitative case study. The main purpose of this literature review was to demonstrate divergent views on homosexuality stemming from fictional, scientific, sociological, and historical perspectives ranging from ancient Greece to the modern era. Our objective was to enlighten the public on the existing writing discourse on LGB that depicts the enormous diversified attitudes and contributing multiple factors that are critical to our research. The literature review was conducted using a variety of pools of information which included research papers, banned novels, and governmental papers. Periods of time were allocated for the literature and library researchers that helped to strengthen the body of this research study. Finally, and most importantly, the research study also wants to contribute to the systematic collection and analysis of the data on LGBT lives in Iran that is sorely lacking and needed. The quantitative survey reflects the basic premise in any research project. Appropriate and good quality methods are a prerequisite of a research study in order to be representative, reliable, and valid. Without good quality methods, it is highly unlikely to ascertain whether the validity of the research findings truly reflect the real needs of LGBT communities. The existing research methodologies should be assessed for its usefulness in capturing necessary data for future research and to inform complex policy and funding decision makers so that it is taken seriously by potential funders. Collateral consequences of poor or non-transparent methodology or data collection are findings that are either biased and/or misleading. This plausibly could lead to damaging misrepresentation of issues pertaining to the LGBT communities. The transparency and quality of reporting is ethically important for a number of practical and principled reasons. Accurate methods reporting allow for appropriate peer review, critical evolution of studies, eases reproduction and replication of research findings, reduces waste, avoids redundancy and unnecessary repetition, and facilitates public trust in scientific research. This chapter explains what methodologies were applied, the methodological issues, ethical considerations, limitations, the research analysis itself, and also the design strategies underpinning this research study are discussed. The methodological aspects include approaches to sampling, qualitative and quantitative methods, community consultation and dissemination, and ethical limitations. Whilst explaining the stages and processes involved in the study, this chapter also discusses the research methodologies and the design strategies underpinning this research used in the study, including data collection and analysis methods. Methodological barriers have been highlighted as a primary reason for the limited research with lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Thus, strategies for anticipating and addressing potential methodological barriers are needed. To address this need, this study discusses potential challenges associated with conducting research with LGB people and describes specific strategies for addressing these challenges. Each step of the research process, from development of research questions to interpretation and dissemination of results, is discussed. This discussion concludes with a summary of recommended strategies for advancing the quality and quantity of future scholarship with LGB people. Background of the research. This study research emerged in 2016 when the previous project on early child marriage, ECM, was published in English and Persian and launched at the University of Oxford, London, and at the Tehran National Library in Iran. Prior to this, LGBT research study, the subjects of inquiry were mainly centered on late childhood and early young adulthood issues such as the harmful traditional practices of FGM, female genital mutilation, and honor killings. These abominable pressing topics of concern produced an epiphany moment of realization that the author of this research study has always seen and understood. Despite its variation and diversity, FGM and ECM spring from the same oppressive framework, i.e., human slavery. Slavery exists in many forms, from the visible cruel chains of slavery to the invisible chains of societal disapproval and rejection that corralled individuals under the genesis of social deviance and abnormal. Groups of people who are reduced to insignificant nothings, unspoken and kept silent, unacknowledged and scored upon. These subgroups within society lack attention not only from civil society itself, but also from the social structures thriving inside society that supposedly are put in place to proffer protection, such as the legal system, the police, and the courts. Not only are those in authority ignoring them, but these subgroups are given sparse attention from society in general. Many are victims of presupposed assumptions and are automatically deemed deviant, abnormal, and inherently dangerous. Many live their lives under these clouds of disparaging labels. The history of oppression and discrimination has greatly affected the well-being of LGB individuals as they do suffer from the reinforcement of societal negative messages, stigmatization, widespread inequality, and the struggle not to get caught under Iran's repressive regime where Islamic law criminalizes same-sex relations. The idea of exposing this gradually shaped itself into its present form as a research study. The research study presents an overview and exploration of the dynamics of LGBT individuals in Iran that employs fieldwork as a base. The survey represents 500 personal accounts of chronic incidents of prejudice, discrimination, and other forms of discrimination experienced by LGBT respondents from the 3 largest cities in Iran, including one city reputed for its religious fervor. This study, in the long queue of the continuum of previous similarly liked studies, puts another debate to the surface of LGB individuals' lives that are persistent quotidian cycles of fear and suppression by analyzing the reasons and root causes of such dislikes. This covered sexual minority group of LGB in Iran possesses unknown boundaries that are too difficult to distinguish, to approach, and to gain trust. Although there have been some surveys on LGBT in homophobic Muslim countries, see Chapter 2 for a more in-depth discussion. In general, there has been little research on attitudes toward homosexuality amongst Muslims, mainly attributed to difficulties associated with conducting empirical research into such a taboo topic. Moreover, as argued by Murray, 1997, there is a culture of collective denial of homosexuality in Islamic societies. The present study is unique in its perspective towards LGBT minorities. Our first priority and utmost concern was how they tackled the day-to-day prejudices, discrimination, societal disapproval, and threats of legal punishment they chronically face. This research study findings conveys a clear message about the massive scale of change needed in Iran for LGBT individuals. This is based on an optimistic anticipation that the respective study would bridge the data and research gap on LGB and development in the Iranian context by collecting reliable first-hand data. This plausibly poses many challenges, but it is the key to establishing evidence-based policies and strengthening the economic case for inclusion. Furthermore, The study would also help in mobilizing experts from multiple sectors by presenting a comprehensive narrative of the actual on-the-ground realities. Methodology adopted in previous studies. This research is comparable to the normal available realm of methodologies, ranging from qualitative to quantitative techniques, fieldworks, ethnographies, countrywide surveys, etc. Each method was chosen for its utmost functionality and often adopted based on the subjectivity and the sphere of research. This topic is extremely sensitive and often shrouded in secrecy even amongst and within families. In a country as Iran, where social norms and harsh legal sanctions create an atmosphere of justifiable fear and paranoid distrust, one must always take heed not only from the sociological and anthropological method that usually are priority, but also from the inherent ethical boundaries in which these methods operate. It can be limited in scope and restricted in range. Moreover, the political forces operating in Iran potentially rendered the research study susceptible to reciprocal repercussions for both the researchers and the LGB interviewers. For example, whilst undertaking the field missions, there was always the omniscient presence of fear of being exposed, caught by the security of police forces, or being spied upon. There were moments we were afraid. This occurred on more than several occasions when the subjects preferred to have their interviews in parks or other public locations. These potential repercussions affected critical aspects of the work. Hence, this is where mere methodology had to be sacrificed to assure the LGB person's safety and confidentiality. There is no redeeming value in a perfectly conducted research that harms its participants. In previous researches, several studies have been conducted within the parameter of gender studies and human rights, which differ in their basic approaches to the participants and respondents. In the author's first research, FGM study that was the first countrywide research on issue of a very similar nature, a survey was conducted through the 4 main provinces of Iran that were still practicing this harmful traditional practice on high levels. After estimating the overall frequencies, the team concluded that out of the 4 provinces with the highest frequency of practicing FGM included West Azerbaijan, Kermanshah, Kurdistan, and Hormozgan, located in western and southern Iran. 4 main geographical directions were then chosen as the first cluster, each within an urban area. For each city or town, a number of villages or countrysides were chosen as the second cluster for further evaluations. Interviews with local informants and key persons from each community were arranged, as this permitted gathering a great deal of information to help shape the vital chronic steps of the research. Victims of FGM and their families were interviewed in confidential settings, and qualitative analysis of the gathered data were then maintained through SPSS software. The findings and results of the study, published both in Farsi and English and submitted to the UN and the UNICEF, provided first-hand and up-to-date information on this much-neglected subject. Our next research study on ECM took place under the same quantitative manner, although with different steps and logistics. ECM is prevalent in most rural areas, cutting across a wide range of socioclasses, economies, and spheres. Consequently, a more detailed set of group surveyors was sent to the top 7 provinces of Iran that had a high ECM frequency and rate. Systematic sampling method was applied to those areas in which ECM was highly practiced and overwhelmingly as an accepted societal norm. Teams of 4 were sent to each district, following up with the aforementioned cluster sampling method. Localized DHS questionnaires were filled out, and the qualitative analysis of the gathered data alongside narratives of the ECM victims, their families, local informants and key characters, and social figures. Similar to the first research study, the findings are readily available and published both in Farsi and English. Unlike our previous studies that were accompanied with images and photos, this current study is not. Given the delicate subject matter and, more importantly, the potential lethal repercussions and stigma that could result from exposing faces and pictures, the research team decided that in the interest of privacy and respect, not to show their faces. Their safety and well-being was our primordial priority. Methodology for current study. Most projects of this nature, whilst tackling LGBT issues in the framework of gender studies, often lack sound methodology and in all likelihood suffer from the almost inescapable weakness of convenience sampling. Building upon the two earlier research studies, the current research study was resigned to minor inevitable mistakes that could potentially lead to methodological sacrifice. Given the highly sensitive issue of LGBT and its hidden narrative of LGB, theory fell behind reality. We were obligated to provide the utmost effort to keep these entities as close as possible. The data presented in the subsequent part are the findings from 180 semi-structured, in-depth interviews conducted with LGB individuals in Iran. The details of the orientation of interviewers, research methods, sample demographic information, and data analysis are discussed below. Training of the interviewers. When thinking about the best methodological approaches within the LGB context that addresses issues of sexuality and/or gender, it was crucial to realize the means by which language, categories, definitions used to describe individuals could plausibly impact the participants and the research study itself. Giving some thought to these matters is critical, as both quantitative and qualitative research demands accurate definitions and classifications. This is essential to accurately analyze statistical data. In this regard, the various definitions and classifications are often appended to certain groups of people. As such, these issues help shape a project's methodological trajectory and credibility. Perhaps one of the most striking features of this research study is that in comparison to similarly held research as previously described, this research study on LGB faced major methodologically challenges that require precise attention, namely the social status and living conditions in Iran. This necessitated the research team to adopt a new approach to the study. In order to do so, a number of interviewers underwent training in preparation for their assigned tasks. Several workshops and field visits were arranged to augment the selection and preparation of the team members. A team of 8 graduate students with various backgrounds and expertise in sociology, anthropology, and social work embarked on 6 months training under the supervision of the writer of this book and his research assistant. Their training was twofold: to learn how to approach highly sensitive and personal subjects, and to address vulnerable groups in society with significant low numbers of participants in an unbiased manner. The newly cadre was comprised equally of male and female to access lesbian and gays. The initial orientation equipped interviewers with the requisite skills to ask questions about the dimension of sexual orientation and to probe sensitive issues carefully. The training also explained the reasons and questions had been added, reviewed the clarification language about the responses categories, and the privacy protection of responses. Every single step had been methodically and well-planned and precise in order not to lose the very hard-to-find participants of the study. Even unintentional trivial mistakes could potentially have devastating and significant consequences. Population and geographical location of the research. LGB individuals exist in all facets of Iranian societies and regions and are clearly not limited to any specific urban or rural area. An internal decision was made that the research would be conducted in major metropolitan cities of Iran, as neither the available data nor the locals within each region would have any input or influence the outcome. To achieve the underlying essential objective, 3 major metropolitan cities of Iran were found to be potentially more open-minded so that LGB groups and persons might have more freedom in expression. Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan were the chosen cities. In viewing the structural mechanisms that operate against LGB persons at different levels of actions, and given the cultural differences, societal contexts, and decades of ruling traditions, selecting these 3 metropolitan cities was a wise choice. Additionally, Many LGB groups from these three metropolitan cities in Iran used social networks and were habitually exposed to social media, the flurry of social networks and digital communications. Lastly, these three cities were reputed for well-known meeting spots and parks where the LGB community districtly gathered in small groups or visited in order to bond. Some of these parks and cafes are familiar to the public, especially in the city of Tehran, where many LGB individuals are recognized by their appearance. A brief overview of each city is given below. Tehran. Tehran is the capital of Iran and a metropolitan city. It represents a fusion of an historical and developed era. This vibrant Iranian capital is home to 15 million people and is located in the northern part of the country. Tehran is Iran's administrative, economic, and cultural center, as well as the major industrial and transportation center of the region. The city sits on the slopes of the Alborz Mountains at an elevation of about 10 to 12 meters. Most commercial and government buildings are located within the center of the city. The climate is marked by seasonal contrasts, with short springs and autumns, separating cold winters and hot, dry summers. Although the majority of the people in Tehran are Persian-speaking, as roughly 99% of the population understand and speak Persian, there are also large populations of other Iranian ethnicities in the city, such as Azerbaijanis, Armenians, Lurs and Kurds who speak Persian as an acquired second language. There were some compelling reasons why Tehran was one of the chosen cities. First of all, in recent years, small pockets of gay public life have been established itself around the city. At night, a well-known park near the city theater and the University of Tehran transitions to a vibrant cruising ground for gay men. They come to troll the park, to look, to show off, exchanging furtive glances in the dark, occasionally meeting for a few minutes in the public facilities or heading to some third location for more comprehensive interaction. This does not mean that the LGB has become a common norm in Tehran. Although there does exist classes of nightlife for LGB, there is still less tolerance for homosexuality. Gestures, holding hands, intimate looks are not unusual things. Nonetheless, they are permissible until they are not noticed. This has given a little breathing space to gays in Tehran as compared to other cities and rural areas. Gays from the lower classes and rural areas, where stigmatization is often most severe, they rarely have the ability to move out of the house before marriage. Even in the more modern and wealthy communities, there is generally little acceptance of homosexuality, but some middle and upper-class Iranians have the means to create parallel lives out of sight from their relatives or friends. Additionally, many LGB mostly move to Tehran, which is a bit more liberal when it comes to have a space for their particular orientation. These are the compelling reasons that Tehran was selected to be researched in terms of LGB. Finally, there was also a contributory logistical factor. Accessing LGB is easier in Tehran as compared to other rural areas or smaller cities. Mashhad. The historical city of Mashhad is amongst the most influential areas in the region in terms of archaeology, tourism, historical monuments, and religiosity. Mashhad, with an area about 328 square kilometers and 3 million inhabitants, is the second largest and most populated city in Iran after the capital, Tehran, and amongst the largest cities within the Islamic world. The city annually hosts around 21 million local and 2 million foreign Arab Shiite visitors who mostly visit for Islamic and cultural tourism. Mashhad is the second prominent and largest city in east of Iran and the capital of Khorasan Razavi province. For some time, Mashhad has long been the host city for visitors and tourists for the Shiite sect of Islam. It has been a pioneer and prominent venue for scholars and intellectuals for spreading Islamic knowledge and the Shiite school of thought. Mashhad, as the place for the coexistence of religions and sects, has also been the focal point of influential historical and revolutionary events. Mashhad is famous for the shrine of Ali ibn Musa Reza, PBUH, thus ornamented to the noble Razavi characteristic derived from historical experience. Although Mashhad is a cultural hub that has gained a vast popularity amongst tourists, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders are not living freely in Mashhad. Less than 10 years ago, the mere existence of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, intersex, and queer was denied by then-President of Iran. 3 years earlier, 2 teenagers who had been accused of sodomy were publicly hung in Mashhad. In Iran, everyone must live as a heterosexual. In other words, heterosexuality is an obligatory sexual orientation identity for everyone in Iran, and this dogma is particularly acute in Mashhad. People of every sexual orientation have to behave and conduct themselves as if they were heterosexuals. In this part of the study, the researchers not only tried to measure the number of LGBTs amongst adult men and women in Mashhad, but also capture their way of lives, including this enormous psychological state of feigning. Isfahan. Isfahan is a famous conservative Iranian touristic city, is no doubt amongst the most important historical cities and urban center in Iran throughout most of the Persian history. It is located in central part of Iran that intersects all main routes in 4 directions. This city acquires its social and cultural traits from neighboring provinces, especially in towns near the borders. The latest census, 2014, recorded a population of 5,007,000 residents. The dominated nationality and language is Persian, also referred to as Farsi, and the Isfahani dialect. The vast majority of the population are Shiite Muslims. The bulk of the populace adhere to traditional beliefs, and this loyalty to traditions is seen within the province's context. Variety of nationalities including Kashgai Turk, Bakhtiari law, and Fars helped shape the distinguished forms and cultures and norms in the province. During the Iraqi war in Iran, Isfahan province witnessed the thousands of immigrants who came from the Khuzestan province and other border areas. This welcoming variety of Fars, Law, Bakhtiari, Jewish, and Armenian people alone has had a significant role in shaping the province's demographical outlook. It was a safe locale away from the war zone. The plethora of industrial factories proved to be a source of attraction for the jobless and homeless immigrants. The prevalence of LGB in Isfahan is no doubt undeniable. The young generation in Isfahan is very free and liberal and never hesitant to experience new ideas. There are multiple incidences of arrests of gays in Isfahan, which justifies the notion of their active presence in the city. Accordingly, Isfahan was selected to demonstrate how this new generation of LGB orientation is surviving in the city that has a vast historical, religious, and cultural background. Areas of interest and sampling. Multiple challenges are associated with sampling the LGB population in Iran, especially when trying to obtain a representative sample. The biggest challenge was accessing the LGB population and receiving sufficient response rate. In such types of researches, there are random samples. As this particular research is novel, random samples of the LGBT population are impossible to obtain and peruse because no conceivable sampling frame exists for them. Additionally, problematic and virtually impossible was obtaining representative samples of the LGB population, partly because there is no clear-cut definition of what or who is LGB. Undoubtedly, this may be explained by the simple fact that many LGB people may choose not to identify themselves, or in other words, they have not admitted to themselves. Combining several sampling approaches assists by tackling these challenges, maximizing the diversity and increasing the chances of number of people being selected. One increasingly popular method in recruiting subjects is the snowball sampling. Snowball sampling can be used when a qualified participant shares an innovation with other subjects similar situated who fulfill the qualifications defined for the targeted population. This was one sampling method used amongst a range of innovative approaches that included the use of sponsors, key informants, and peer researchers. This method resulted in a sample of 180 people, diverse than many comparable studies. Using snowball sampling provided an intimate insight into the vagaries of sampling and data collection with regards to LGB individuals. As all LGB group activities are banned in Iran and no university or researcher is allowed to approach the issue, apart from limited number of research studies with a focus on religious and medical aspects of LGB groups, there is no official data on the number of LGB in Iran. There was also no compelling major evidence provided by the government and no non-governmental institutions which are often in direct contact with LGB individuals. Therefore, the critical question was who to approach rather than how to approach. The crucial lack of any official or even unofficial data on LGB individuals in Iran forced us to resort to other forms of population estimations. Due to ingrained religious responses and legal approaches in Muslim countries such as Iran, homosexuals are reticent in revealing their sexual identity. Nevertheless, thanks to social and virtual networks, the homosexual community has managed to connect to one another and manifest their very existence in the form of underground clandestine groups in such cities as Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. Through vast investigations, it became clear that LGB societies in Iran are more comfortable with using social network platforms such as Telegram and WhatsApp than Facebook and other applications. By joining in lesbian, gay, and bisexual groups on Telegram, we discovered that these social network groups have no less than 500 members and in some instances as high as 1,000. The added comfort of anonymity and the often use of multiple SIM cards and IDs provided the members with a more heightened sense of freedom. As most of the LGB individuals maintain a low profile and are understandably reluctant to emerge from their secret shells, this has inevitably led to their increased use of online social networking tools and applications of the virtual world. This is the only provided space where they can be their true selves. Due to ingrained religious responses and legal approaches in Muslim countries such as Iran, homosexuals are reticent in revealing their sexual identity. Research methods. Mixed research methods. The long-term consultations resulted in a selection of range of methods to choose, and even these methods were prone to differ from one city to another. This research exemplifies a mixed method research where both quantitative and qualitative research techniques, methods, approaches, concepts, and language have been combined into a single study. Using mixed methods enhances research because each technique has its pros and cons. In this case, although the survey could not surmise why questions were answered in a certain way, nevertheless, the survey could reach more people. There are two predominant methodological approaches in research which is commonly used in every research study, i.e., qualitative and quantitative research. For this particular research study, both methods were adopted to elicit information from the respondents. Unlike previous research studies of a like nature undertaken by the author, there were two approaches and methods utilized to make this current research study technically sound and politically correct. In the following section of the study, we elaborated on the methods and approaches that were utilized to identify, approached, interviewed the participants on the one hand, and triangulated, interpreted, and excreted relent data on the other hand. The snowball sampling method. As previously discussed, snowball sampling is a popular technique amongst social scientists who wish to work with a population difficult to identify or locate. This often occurs when the population is somewhat marginalized, homeless, or include those individuals who were formerly incarcerated or involved in illegal activities. It is also common to use this sampling technique with people whose membership in a particular group is not widely known, such as LGB individuals in Iran. For the research on LGB in Iran, sampling was conceptually designed as a method that offered a way to overcome many of the challenges associated with inviting difficult-to-reach communities to be a part of this research study. Adaptations of the basic approach were then developed to extend the effectiveness of the strategy in identifying hard-to-reach and hidden populations and to expand the character of the achieved sample in order to make it more representative of the general population amongst whom these hidden populations reside. A particular advantage of snowball sampling was its cultural competence and the inherent trust it promotes amongst potential participants. This helped to increase the likelihood of the identified person agreeing to talk with the teams of researchers. Quantitative research, qualitative survey. The first data collection step in this research was conducting a quantitative survey. A survey was used to gather information about the thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, values, perceptions, personality, and behavioral patterns of research participants. This is the first study on LGB community conducted whilst actually inside the country. Moreover, the use of public space whilst conducting the survey allowed many of the participants to answer questions with relative ease and provided the foundation for a more detailed research study to be conducted in the future. Participants were located through snowball sampling, in which the survey was first distributed to a few in the study area, who in turn passed it to their friends, both males and females who identify in LGB community and lived in the area. Individual in-depth interviews with these key stakeholders provided the bulk of data to form the investigation. The initial interviews occasionally supplemented by some paired and group interviews and telephone conferences. Fieldwork took place between September and December 2017. Each interview was exploratory and interactive in form based on a topic guide that listed the key topics to be addressed. The interviews were flexible to allow issues of relevance for individual respondents to be covered through detailed follow-up questioning. Additionally, the quantitative part of the research was driven by the context of the questionnaire itself through a systematic estimation. A snowball method was used on every LGB individual, mainly name the number of people he or she knows whose sexual orientation falls within the domain of this study, LGB. Using this strategy, participants counted the number of their LGB friends or people they regard as LGB. Therefore, a part of the quantitative data collection relied on the honesty and personal estimations of people who are already a member of the LGB community. Qualitative research. Qualitative methods have proven to be an effective research paradigm to address similar types of research questions. Qualitative research is grounded in the assumption that individuals construct social reality in the form of meanings and interpretations. As qualitative research is interpretive research, it is important that researchers use high standards of quality and verification techniques. The researcher could, for example, spend a prolonged time in the field gathering data. In the current study, this meant that as many interviews as possible were conducted until all categories were saturated and no new themes emerged. Qualitative research was well suited for this research study as it allowed the researcher to capture the voices and complex views of this marginalized group were captured and noted. The qualitative aspect of this study was viewed within a threefold dimension: the context of current political debate about LGB lives, the social fabric and norms of the participants, geographical region, and the context in which to enter into the analysis. These contextual factors add a complex layer to the research study, yet with rigorous qualitative research, rich and insightful descriptions of this complex phenomenon are presented. Research obviously can be done in many ways, but its usefulness and effectiveness on social realities must be taken into account. As rigid attention to the proper implementation of research results was crucial, this naturally led us to use the qualitative ground theory (GT) method. As previously mentioned, this research study is emblematic of mixed methodologies, meaning that the social interpretations and results are mainly driven from the GT method. Thus, the interviews that incorporated a wide aspect of LGB lives were analyzed and noted through the GT method of coding. Despite the draconian conditions and perpetual feelings of fear, What was revealed was a surprisingly optimistic and brighter image of what is currently taking place of LGB's individuals' lives in Iran. A number of open-ended questions were purposefully designed so the interviewed LGB individual felt free to open up and discuss the length issues and matters that they wanted to share. What was immediately observable and interesting was that a significant majority were keen to share their ideas, their thoughts, and talk about material issues. It was also readily obvious to the research team that the poignant LGB discourse needs to be heard from the LGB community itself. The sets of localized questions were decided as the main course of interview directions, and in each part, the questions and the relevant track of the talk were different for lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. Whilst the face-to-face interviews were being conducted, the researchers wrote down field notes and recorded observations and impressions of the LGB individuals. After each interview, additional descriptive and reflective notes were compiled. This afforded a source of triangulation for the data, as well as a background for a more complete picture of the LGB individuals. By doing so, the researcher was able to ascertain other aspects about the strength of the LGB individuals and triangulate the information by using multiple forms of data, sources, and methods to corroborate the evidence that was uncovered. Grounded theory. In grounded theory method, the process of analysis initiates as soon as the data is collected and continues until the research study is completed. Once sufficient data has been collected and transcribed, it is possible to progress to the next stage, the building of an indexing system for the data. The grounded theory method, as defined by Strauss and Corbin, 1998, is the theory that was derived from the data, systematically gathered and analyzed through the research process. Grounded theory was chosen for several reasons. Firstly, it provides a great deal of flexibility for the experiences of the participants to emerge through the identified themes. Secondly, as there is very little known about the presence of LGB in Iran, it requires openness and flexibility on the part of the researcher throughout the data collection and data analysis process, which occur concurrently, each process informing the other. Basic grounded generation uses an approach with open, axial, and selective coding. All data was transcribed and coded soon after the conclusion of each interview by the researcher. This also allowed for memoing, diagramming, and shifts in the direction of the research as the data collection process unfolded. All transcriptions were conducted by the researcher and transcribed from digital recordings to text transcripts. In this theory, the data was gathered and analyzed before a complete review of the literature has been completed, so the grounded theory that is created is based in real-world data and not preconceived notions based on prior research that could influence the researcher's objectivity. Data collection and fieldwork. The two different categories of fieldwork began in mid-2016. In the first category, LGB individuals were contacted through their online social network groups. In Iran, the LGB community is subtle and unknown. The research team encountered difficulties in locating, contacting, and establishing an informed conversation, which then created a steady flow of several setbacks and barriers. In the second one, the bulk of data on LGB had been collected through the surveys. This research study, its implementations and aims were being proposed to an individual with the hopes that this would eventually lead to a face-to-face meeting or chatting. Initially, as there had been a great deal of mistrust and suspicion due to previous bad experiences, gaining their trust and demonstrating the intent of the research study was daunting and difficult. Here is when the second type of approach became useful. A specific LGB person introduced a friend of his or her, or arranged a meeting with another group of their friends. The interviewer's goal was to keep up with the chain and follow up with this snowball sampling method with additional methods such as networking. Ethical limitations and considerations. Limitations. It is important to recognize the limitations of time and budget constraints in this research study. These attributes should be taken into account when examining the LGB data should be considered carefully within the full body of literature on the well-being of LGB individuals. Whilst undertaking this sensitive research study, our initial thoughts were how the findings could lead to new LGB policies, interventions, and programs. It is our genuine hope that future research should replicate this research study with a larger, possibly nationally representative population. Although in general LGB individuals are a cloistered population, it is even more so in Iran. Many LGBs in Iran fervently guard their sexual identities against the backdrops of negative theological, legal, and social unacceptance of homosexuality. The dissentient and unsupportive social and psychological obstacles they face are enormous. Given their insulated and angst-hidden lives and understandable fears of coming out, this research study cannot claim unequivocally that this sample is representative of the general population of LGB individuals. In terms of accuracy and validity of the research theme, the research team made every effort to ensure the accuracy of all the information, the content, contained in the publications on our platform. Due to the extreme sensitivity of the topic, the legal orientation of the target population, and also the social regard of sexual minorities who live in societies that do not accept them, claims of completeness and correctness of context are not the purpose of this study. The very carefully set up grounded theory method was used to ensure the maximum understanding of the people within the LGB categories and their society that does not include them. The accuracy of the content should be independently verified with primary sources of information. Ethical considerations. Ethical considerations were extremely important to the sampling and collection strategy. Moore and Miller, 1999, mentioned that members of vulnerable populations often experience multiple risks that may diminish their autonomy, thus rendering them doubly or indeed triply and so on vulnerable. This means that researchers might avoid working with people who are classified or perceived as vulnerable. Consequently, their needs and concerns are not addressed within research, practice, and policy arenas. Albeit there are many ethical limitations and boundaries if we are going to research on sensitive topics or groups. However, it is clear that some research questions may only be effectively addressed by recourse to work with vulnerable people. For our research objectives, the research study employed numerous techniques to ensure their safety. The research study also employed ethical practices to ensure young people were not harmed by participating. As this research study involves human subjects, institutional review board permission was required. Particular attention was paid to ensure that the young people were carefully informed and understood the nature of the research. Confidentiality was maintained by anonymizing the data and using pseudonyms for the participants, youth organizations, and their locations. Both the interview and observational data were collected. Participants were interviewed in a location of their choice. By informing the participants, they acknowledged that he or she understood his or her rights as a volunteer for the project, thereby giving permission to the researcher to use any data collected. Given the fact that the interviews were conducted in public and open places in the form of an ordinary chat rather than a formal interview, the participants were willing to open up for deep and long interviews. The interviews were mostly audio recorded using digital voice recorder and subsequently transcribed for analysis. The recordings were destroyed after the transcription, and all names and identifying information were changed and or removed so the identity of the participants remained confidential. In some places where the traditional norms of society were the ruling sectors and the keys in which people socialized and formed their opinion on sexual education, working with LGB individuals tended to be even more arduous. As the case of the city of Isfahan, even when most of the subjects were introduced by a mutual friend, the participants would not answer all the questions. Bearing in mind the sensitivity and ultra-vulnerability of the participants, their personal issues, routines, and everyday problems, this potentially could create a barrier of morality judgment. In order not to aggressive and harm the respondents, the author had to sometimes sacrifice anthropological thirst and curiosity whilst maintaining a well-trained professional team. Methodological challenges in conducting research on LGB. The methodological challenges associated with research on LGB individuals are numerous in a country such as Iran. These challenges include accurately defining, measuring and sampling respondents, and the ethical considerations discussed above. The following section explores these challenges in some detail, asking: first, how researchers may define, classify, and categorize LGB people. Second, discussing the inherent problems associated with sampling this population. And third, taking into consideration the ethical considerations that are imperative with respect to working with LGB individuals. Conducting research on LGB individuals presents numerous challenges, as it is about a representative subgroup of individuals where standard populist definitions are lacking and are not readily identifiable. Samplings of LGB populations in Iran are difficult as they are a social group that is generally considered to be hard to reach. These challenges are further compounded because many in the LGB community distrust research studies and researchers, which may partly explain the sparse lack of methodologically rigorous, large-scale studies in this domain. The major hurdle in respective research is the meager amount of available evidence that provides a reliable estimate of the numbers of LGB individuals in Iran. Whilst there exists sizable, smaller-scale qualitative research that explores the experiences of LGBT people in public life, there remains a dearth of evidence that details the actual size of the population in question. Reasons for this lack of evidence is debatable and varied. Betts 2008, for example, suggested that when people are asked to define their sexual orientation or gender, there is a generalized failure to capture the subtlety that may be associated with varying definitions and categorizations of sexual minorities. There is therefore confusion about what or who is actually being measured. Further challenges are associated with questions, which in turn invite a range of possible labels. Another challenge researchers faced was the extra time and effort required to maintain standards of deep interview methods. Despite the considerable amount of effort and attention given to the time management and efficient data recording whilst training the team, the interviews were often long and difficult to arrange. It is a hope that the findings from this research study will mandate change for civil society, policy influencing, government, traditional leaders, and other stakeholders. To the many LGBT individuals who dared to share their stories and experiences, their contributions have been invaluable. An elaboration on the researcher's narrative. Gender is a socially generated concept that assigns and attributes different roles and identities to both men and women. In the vast majority of most cases, gender differences are not neutral. Indeed, in a sweeping majority of societies, gender represents a significant form of social and sexual stratification. As a sensitive and crucial form of identity, gender often determines and construes a variety of life opportunities and chances in which individuals and groups can either have or have not. Gender's tremendous impact on ascribed social roles cannot be underestimated, from the family to government policy. Any discussions on Iran's sexual minorities, their collective social plight and day-to-day experiences mandates a comprehensive insight not only into the social context and societal failures directed towards this silent and often terrified community, but also at the woven web of Iran's patriarchal social and cultural infrastructures that highly influence religion, laws, and the educational body's players. The issue of sexual orientation in Iran has turned into a complicated maze of intricacies and unknown territories that has collaterally undermined the social lives of many sexual minorities in Iran. Although most of the international community has acknowledged a spectrum of sexual orientations that has gone beyond biological definitions, in Iranian society, sexual orientations are viewed as an aberration. As aptly stated, There's no dialogue, no discussion about us or our lives. This is due to Iran's unacceptance of sexual minorities that has firmly rooted in its centuries long-lasting venerated norms, resistant traditions, and most importantly, in its pivotal and powerful role of religion. This has of course made any effort to shed light on the issue even more difficult. The true stories of the LGB community in Iran are more than a mainstream Western read page turner. The true story is a rich and dynamic narrative that embraces creativity, poetry, resilience, love, and family. There are the ancient odds to same-sex love that persisted after Islam and were pushed aside and forgotten after colonialism. There are the unique ways that men and women managed to show affection to one another that allow their unacknowledged and unspoken lives to covertly exist. Quiet, but always present. Behind the simple narratives, the same-sex love is intertwined into the numerous anecdotes of their daily lives in Iran. It has been noted that despite state repression and the frequent compromises they are forced to make to protect themselves, many Iranian LGBs manage to get on with their lives and to forge a sense of community and solidarity. The most powerful aspects of the stories from the LGB community in Iran do not derive from the details or contexts. Instead, it is derived from the collective voices of the storyteller and noted by the researchers, making their poignant stories microcosmically captivating all of the issues that so many LGB individuals face. This is a powerful, riveting read worth listening to. LGB individuals in Iran challenge the rigidly defined parameters of sex and family, and in the process, transform the very fabric of this religious and patriarchal society. This research study seeks to address the living experiences amongst three sexual orientation groups. The interviews with the LGB groups were conducted in three largest and well-known cities in Iran, using a questionnaire specifically developed. In this research study, the different preferences, interests, and all other aspects of homosexuality have been carefully considered. Drawing on ethnographic, first-hand accounts and interviews, the research study and its subsequent part elaborates on the processes and the findings. Iran's attitudes toward homosexuality have had a decisive effect on the extent to which individuals have masked their sexual orientation. The narrative exposes the covert feelings and fears from the individuals themselves who live in Iran. As a result, one gets a palpable sense of what life is like for an individual whose sexual orientation is heavily sanctioned. Their stories have never been heard or written or being told today. These stories take place in Iran, where homosexuality is illegal, making the feeling they own much more forbidden. Data analysis. As mentioned in preceding paragraphs, the methods adopted for analysis are prototypical mixed methods often used in research of such a comprehensive and delicate nature. As previously discussed, the methods comprised of qualitative, quantitative, grounded theory, and snowball method. It should be noted that whilst the methods are presented here in a sequential order, the actual processes were seldom, if at all, in a concatenated order. The myriad used of constant comparative method of data analysis, sampling, data collection, and data analysis occurred continuously and in relation to one another. This required analysis at every stage in the research process. Upon collecting data from participants that carried on throughout the interview process, data analysis began straight away. Strauss and Corbin, 1998, identified 5 purposes of coding procedures. 1. To build rather than test theory. 2. To provide researchers with analytic tools for handling masses of raw data. 3. To help analysts to consider alternative meanings of phenomena. 4. To be systematic and creative simultaneously. And 5. To identify, develop, and connect the concepts that are the building blocks of theory. Whilst fundamentally interpretive, the process for data collection and analysis does involve specific steps. The first of these steps is open coding, where categories of information are formed from initial interviews and include subcategories or properties and dimensions, range and variation within each category. During open coding, data are broken down into discrete parts, closely examined and compared for similarities and differences. Where properties are the general or specific characteristics or attributes of a category, dimensions represent the location of a property along a continuum or range. In this study, these characteristics and their properties and dimensions could be defined outside of the data collection. The second step in analysis is axial coding, the process of reconnecting the subcategories together in a new and conceptually different ways to discover relationship amongst properties and dimensions. When coding axially, the researcher looks for answers to questions such as why or how come, where, when, how, and with what results. In this step, conditions were examined and relationship statements, hypotheses of sorts, were produced. Selective coding is the next step. It is the process of integrating and refining the theory or the development of a central or core category that relates to all other categories. This is the primary storyline that substantially answers the research questions. To be considered a core category, it must have analytic power gained through its ability to pull the other categories together to form an explanatory whole. Also, a core category should be able to account for considerable variation within categories. The development of this core category allowed development of a storyline that clearly explained the phenomenon that was happening, which in this case was the experience of LGB individuals in their development of self-efficiency and copying in Iran. Ruth Fassinger, 1998, whose work is perhaps less well known than Cass or Savin Williams by student affairs professionals, developed an inclusive model of lesbian gay identity formation. Although it is also stage-based, it is also multifaceted, reflecting dual aspects of development, both individual sexual identity and group membership identity. The first of Fassinger's 4 stages is awareness. From an individual's perspective, being different from heterosexual peers, from a group perspective, the existence of differing sexual orientations among people. The second stage is one of exploration. On an individual level, emotions and erotic desires for individuals of the same gender. On the group level, how one might fit into the category of a gay person as a social class. The third level represents a deepening commitment to this changing notion of identity. A personalization of the knowledge and beliefs about same-sex sexuality. On the group level, personal involvements with a non-heterosexual reference group, realizing oppression and consequences of choices of vocalizing and socially participating with non-heterosexuals. The final stage, internalization and synthesis, represents an integration of same-sex sexuality into one's overall identity from the collective perspective. It conveys one's identity as a member of a minority group across social contexts. Fassinger, 1998. Findings of the study. The research findings have been collected, screened, and triangulated through the GT method so that the actual situation could be visible to a vast majority of readers via diagrammatic representations and direct quotes that represents the major facets of the research study. They represent a thorough analysis of what the study gathered through a comprehensive research process in the 3 major and prominent cities in Iran. As previously mentioned, both qualitative and quantitative methods were used to obtain the actual data and synchronize findings in order to reach the actual facts about their lives. Presented in 2 parts, the research study translates elaborate decoded of findings which we discovered by the use of GT method, whilst the figurative findings derived through quantitative method. Qualitative results of the research study. Diagram 1.1. Unveiling identities and accepting sexual orientation. Conceptual model of the living experience of sexual minorities, LGB, in large cities of Iran. 2017 to 2019. Leading factors: relationship experience, sexual attitude, sexual orientation. Intervening factors: environmental judgments, reactions, family circumstances, legal terms, religious belief. The main phenomenon: identity, lifestyle, individual attitude to homosexuality. Strategic actions: seeking a remedy, parallel communications. Results: mental social consequences, fearing of legal prosecution, vulnerability against violence. After discovering one's sexual orientation, what becomes significant is how one reacts, integrates, and accepts this realization. Based on Fassinger's model of lesbian-gay identity formation, homosexuals develop their identity on both the individual and group levels during 4 phases. 1. Awareness. 2. Exploration. 3. Deepening commitment. And 4. Internalization and synthesis. The 4 stages are not a linear and predictable progression, as it may be seen as a collection of 4 common stages that can occur in any order. Nevertheless, almost all homosexuals go through these 4 stages, albeit with individual variation. Following Fassinger's model of lesbian-gay identity formation meant that many of the homosexuals and transsexuals living in Mashhad, although they have reached a phase of awareness and acceptance of their sexual orientation, arriving at this crucial guidepost was excruciatingly difficult. From the time LGB individuals realized their sexual orientation until they arrived to the acceptance phase, many had experienced numerous moments of ebbs and flows. Many were unable to pinpoint with precision a specific time when the realization of their sexuality descended upon them. This might be attributed to a nagging, persistent feeling of being different, as their attraction to their own sex has always existed since childhood and early school days. For most, it was a silent arrival of adolescence and puberty with its accompanying hormonal and physiological changes and sexual maturity. Many coped with their silent realization that they were attracted to their own sex and struggled via denials and attempts to change their sexual orientation. Many were aware that the harbingers of adult heterosexuality and interest in the opposite sex were simply not there. Paradoxically, this difficult road of acceptance of their gay-lesbian identities contributed to their development of personal awareness, including an increased ability to understand and appreciate different perspectives, more concern for the well-being of others, and a willingness to discuss uncomfortable topics. It was observed that for LGB individuals in Mashhad, their orientation eased the difficulty of discussing freely taboo subjects such as sexuality. This self-awareness also has created a sense of resilience and determination about what is and is not wrong. Their personal journey resulted in a demand for others to treat them fairly. The millennial LGB generation who has grown up with the internet and technology are now the generation of individuals who often see the world through digital lenses. Whether this has translated as opening the door to their collective sexual orientation existence or boosting a new sexual elite of technologically savvy LGB individuals is open to discussion. What is irrefutable is that the infiltration of the virtual space and various social network groups inevitably has had a permanent impact on this group. The media, including TV channels and the internet, the fact that people are up to date on how to use the latest communication technologies, and the sufficiently decent levels of the English language have all played a crucial role in unveiling the person's sexual orientation. In an article entitled Changes in Sexual Attitudes, Afsaneh Najmabadi refers to Iran's modernization. She considers sex reassignment surgeries and access to technology as features of transfer from one phase to another. Almost all participants in this research used social media, certain programs and software for communication purposes. With some of these applications, one could activate the location of another LGB individual or to find another homosexuals on the map in the nearby areas just by using one's cell phone. It is worth noting that such programs are filtered but are accessible via a proxy VPN. As previously discussed on Chapter 4, as Telegram groups are mostly monitored and shut down, people continue setting up new groups. Nevertheless, not even the internet is safe. While dating apps like Grindr, Scarf, and Hornet are not censored like Facebook and Twitter, some LGB communities still assume the country's cyber police, FETA, monitor them. Often the best alternative is random and anonymous encounters. What is irrefutable is that amongst the LGB individuals in Iran was our observation of a surprising sense of their superiority and pride, and resilience was present. Many have worked through the arduous task of accepting themselves as gay persons within a homophobic society. The team witnessed their vigor and resilience even in the midst of the cultural and social sanctions which renders them uniquely vulnerable. This is clearly a testament to their strength despite societal criminalization. The in-depth analysis of the interviews startlingly revealed the number of the interviewees who were not initially aware that there existed a name for their sexual orientation. The fact that society had previously deemed sexual orientation as either male or female, leaving no room for another dimension, may have attributed to this unawareness. The sexual orientation ranges are not in par with the sociological and scientific criteria governing the types of homosexuality or transsexuality. More attention is sorely needed if the nature of sexual minorities and their accompanying issues are to be explored. Acceptance of one's sexual orientation does not magically stop at adolescence. The process of self-discovery and accepting one's sexuality evolves over time. People become acquainted with their sexual tendencies within a limited available range. As previously reiterated, the feelings of being different from their peers come to light through such indications as disinterest and inability to establish a relationship with people of the opposite sex. Not having the expected sexual interest in them, satisfaction with links of people of the same sex in a school, having interest different from peers and interest in sexual behaviors which are not defined by socially sanctioned cliches of sexual behavior, such as disinterest in games commonly expected of their biological sex. In the final step of Fassenger's model, integration and identification as a member of a specific minority group now cements. For Iranian LGBs, the struggle is how to gain societal recognition and acceptance by daring to come out in a system that forbids homosexuality. Their fear is a social reality and part of their lives. See Chapter 2 for a more in-depth discussion. An internal research study showed that a group of LGBT individuals shave-posted videos of themselves on Facebook in a campaign to highlight the discrimination against sexual minorities in Iran, where homosexuals are put to death. The qualitative findings of the study are given below with great details.